This presentation is brought to you by the KathleenWellsShow.com. This week, Kathleen interviewed Middle East expert Dahlia Wasfi regarding U.S. airstrikes being launched across Syria and Iraq. Take a listen.
Welcome to the Kathleen Wells Show. I'm delighted to have my guest today because I cannot believe where we are as a country, where we are as a society, where we are as a world. I remember when we had the Iraq War, I was living in Tucson, Arizona, and I was watching C-SPAN religiously. I remember seeing the shock and awe on C-SPAN. I remember seeing, Colin Powell speak before the UN Security Council. I mean, I was watching every little thing about that Iraq War and the lead up, the approach to the Iraq War, and then actually having the Iraq War from start to finish. And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe when I saw shock and awe. That was a little more than 10 years ago. And here we are. I was in Tucson, Arizona, and I moved back to Los Angeles. And here we are. What has happened since then? Libya, Syria. I'm sure I'm missing something. I can't even think. But, I'm drawing a blank. But it's like this perpetual war, this endless war, this endless intervention, this endless military occupation and involvement in the Middle East, in that region. It wasn't like this before. So I'm wondering what's going on. So I'm going to turn to, one of my, I'm disturbed by it. And we all know President Obama's speech recently about us being involved in launching an offensive airstrike across Syria and Iraq because of ISIS. So I'm delighted to have one of my Middle East experts, Dahlia Wasfi, as my guest today, because she's going to hopefully she's going to explain some stuff so I can understand what's going on. I mean, I don't want to live in, as far as I know, no one has any money anymore. So where is the money going? I mean, it seems to me when I first started this radio show, I used to be anti-conservatives, pro, the Democrats. But I've had this radio show for 3.5 years. I'm no longer either party. Both parties are too corporatized and too closely tied to voting for military. Now, I don't want to say too closely tied, but for military intervention in the Middle East because of quote unquote terrorism, quote unquote Islamic extremists, and so we have to intervene. Yet so the domestic and international policies, domestic and foreign policies coming out of Washington D.C. from both parties, Democrats and Republicans, are not good for the American people. They both stink. And I think the American people need to wake up to that. I mean, I would think after the speech that Obama gave last week, the week before last, most Americans would begin to realize if the Iraq War didn't do it, where there were no weapons of mass destruction, I would think the fact that we're going back now doing airstrikes, and even though Obama is insisting that there will be no troops on the ground, we know that's not true based on the evidence, and that's something that I'm going to talk to my guest, Dahlia Wasfi, about. Dahlia Wasfi is an Iraqi American. But I would think that most Americans would now how much more does it take? How much more does it take before most Americans realize that the policies coming out of D.C. from both parties are no good for their American people? How much more does it take? How much more evidence do Americans need? I mean, given what's going on now, all Americans should be protesting. All Americans should be in D.C. marching or calling their representatives. A lot of Americans, I think, are asleep. They don't even know what's going on. I mean, because I don't know why. But this is something I'm going to I'm going to examine with my guest today, Dahlia Wasfi. Let me tell, before I bring her on, let me tell you a little bit about her. Dahlia Wasfi is an Iraqi American. She was born to an American Jewish mother and an Iraqi Muslim father. She lived in Iraq until she was 5 years old. Then she came to the United States. She is a activist and a internationally known speaker. And she's been back to Iraq since shock and awe twice to visit family relatives, and she has a lot of insight. So, Dahlia, I'm delighted to have you on the Kathleen Wells Show again. Thank you for coming on.
Kathleen, thank you so much for having me.
Well, you know what? I'm looking for my notes. I lost them. I don't know where they are, but I'm going to just kind of wing it right now until I can find my notes. The first question I want to ask you, Dahlia, is how did we get here? Did you listen to President Obama's speech about his desire, the necessity to send airstrikes across Iraq and Syria? Did you hear his speech, and give me your response to it if you did?
I did listen to it, not live. I listened to it on the internet the next day, and it sounded a lot like George W. Bush. Of course, Obama now becomes the fourth consecutive U.S. president to give a speech announcing airstrikes on Iraq. And it seems that we're very much where we were 11 years ago, and I think it reflects just how powerful the anti-Islam propaganda has been in this country, and also how powerful the media is in shifting people's attentions, and the Western media shifting people's attentions and terrifying them into agreeing to military action, which I think at the bottom line is what Americans really don't want to be involved in, but they're so terrified now they feel it's the only way. And that's certainly what we see in Hollywood movies, is that violence and airstrikes bring happy endings, but that is not the case in real life at all.
Well, so what prompted this is ISIS. Let's talk about ISIS. I think the beheading of 3 journalists was something that prompted President Obama to come forward and say it's necessary to get rid of ISIS. In fact, his quote was exactly, he said, military action is necessary to halt the spread of the ISIS cancer. So what motivated this intervention, what motivated the airstrikes is the beheading of the 3 journalists.
Well, that's what we're being told, but don't forget the stories that we've been told in the past. In 1991, we were told that America had to go in and reestablish the so-called democracy in Kuwait, which there actually was no democracy in Kuwait. But Kuwait has a lot of oil, and basically we use Kuwait as our gas station in the Gulf. This was about oil, and it was also about tremendously weakening the Iraqi population to put Iraq in a state of weakness, and extensive bombing of civilian infrastructure in 1991, and then 13 years of economic sanctions significantly weakened the Iraqi state. So we were told one story, but there was really another agenda for which we launched the Gulf War. In 2003, we were told a few stories. There were WMDs, there were ties to Al-Qaeda. We were going to liberate the Iraqi people. Again, these were lies. There were no WMDs. There were no ties to Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda was never in Iraq before we invaded. Then we happened to leave the borders unsecured, and Iraq transformed from a secular government to a theocratic government, which we brought to power. So once again, it was about controlling the flow of Iraq's oil and ensuring that the oil sales remained in the American dollar. It had nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction or any sort of threat from Iraq or the Iraqi people towards America. In 2004, we were told the big threat was al-Zarqawi and Al-Qaeda, head of an Al-Qaeda affiliate in Iraq. And because of him, we had to go bomb the living daylights out of the city of Fallujah. Again, this was a lie. This was the object of the two major sieges of Fallujah in 2004 were to crush the legitimate resistance to the illegal American-led military occupation of Iraq. It had nothing to do with al-Zarqawi, who no evidence was ever found that he was in Fallujah. Just at the beginning of the summer, we were told we have to use airstrikes to prevent a genocide of the Yazidi population. Well, that story turned out to be false, too. We were told there were 40,000 people trapped on a mountain. Actually, there were about 5,000 people, half of which had been living there for some time. There was no threat of extermination. But what was in jeopardy were our holdings in the northern city of Erbil, namely a CIA operations center and the headquarters of ExxonMobil and Chevron. This was the real issue of defending, protecting these holdings and ensuring that oil flows from Iraq. So once again, now we're being told and terrified that, these people are killing Western journalists. Now, I don't even know how they're tracking these people down and finding them in order to kill them. But this is again a front for maintaining control of the flow of Iraqi oil and maintaining Iraq in a very weakened state, both of which benefit the U.S. economy and Israeli national security interests, which have been the goals and the objectives. Protecting those interests, that's been the objectives the whole time.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to take a break, but before we go to break, I want to ask you, how did ISIS come into existence? In fact, I've read many accounts that has suggested that ISIS is a creation of U.S. and U.K. military intelligence, covert operations.
I think that much like the uprising or the I don't want to say, because ISIS is not an uprising, but let me just say that the origins of this group, I think, were within Iraq. They emerged, again, there was not this type of religious fundamentalism in Iraq prior to the invasion. This emerged after the invasion. But what we're seeing now, and the images that we're seeing now, I believe has been influenced by Western powers and regional powers who are allied with the West. And these are many of them being the Gulf states. So while it started out as one thing, I think it has been morphed into something else that serves the agenda of the West. And unfortunately, we have seen this happen over and over and over again since the West has had its talons hooked into that part of the world for the sake of taking its resources.
Mm-hmm. So Prime Minister Cameron said, quote, "The only way to defeat ISIS is to stand firm and to send a very straightforward message." He went on to say, quote, a country like ours will not be cowed by these barbaric killers, unquote. We've heard this kind of language before. We're going to take a break. My guest is Dr. Did I mention not only is Dahlia an activist and a renowned international speaker, she's also a physician. Dr. Dahlia Wasfi is my guest. She's a Middle East expert. She's an Iraqi American, and we're talking about this necessity that President Obama spoke about in his recent speech to send airstrikes across Iraq and Syria to defeat ISIS. We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back with Dahlia. Welcome back to the Kathleen Wells Show. My guest is Dr. Dahlia Wasfi, who is an internationally known speaker and activist who happens to also be a physician. Dahlia was born in the United States to an American Jewish mother and an Iraqi Muslim father. She lived in Iraq until she was 5 years old. And in fact, Dahlia has spent years talking about her eyewitness account because she went back to Iraq after shock and awe in 2003. She went back to Iraq Aftershock and Awe in 2003, and she has spoken to over 200 audiences in the United States, on Capitol Hill, in Canada, in Madrid, Spain in 2007. In March 2008, she spoke at the Third International Iraq Conference held in Berlin, Germany. So, Dahlia, thank you for joining me on the Kathleen Wells Show. What I wanted to ask you, are you on the line, Dahlia? Yeah, I thought we lost her, huh? I think we lost Dahlia. You know what? We're going to get her back. What I wanted to ask, in fact, let me give out the call-in number so those who are out there listening can call in and ask Dahlia a question or make a comment. The call-in number is 888-909-1050. So if you have a question or if you'd like to comment about President Obama's recent speech to send airstrikes across Syria and Iraq because of ISIS, please call in with your comments or questions. We lost Dahlia, but we'll be back shortly. We'll get her back. Yeah, my engineer Mia is trying to, I don't know what happened. We had Dahlia via Skype, but we lost her. I don't know what happened with the connection. What else I wanted to say is that since 2003, the U.S. and the U.K. have secretly and openly coordinated direct and indirect support for Islamic terrorist groups linked to Al-Qaeda. And ISIS is one of those groups that we have created. In fact, I read a piece in Counterpunch called "How the West Created the Islamic State." So, Dahlia, we have you back? Oh, I guess not. My engineer Mia is telling me we have Dahlia. We have Dahlia back, but I guess not. We don't have her back yet.
Here I am.
You're here? Oh, fantastic, Dahlia. I don't know what happened. We had some technical problems. Tell me, what were you elaborating on? I kind of lost my train of thought. Do you remember what you were talking about?
Oh, well, we were talking about the origins of this group, ISIS, and that I think what we see today is very different from how the group started. The group started as the Islamic State of Iraq, so its acronym in English anyway was ISI, and it was established in 2006. But nothing really. It was never. It was an extremist group, but never really had a huge impact like what we're seeing today. But what supported its expansion and its strength was the American and Western decision to arm and support groups that were opposing President Assad in Syria. So we started pouring arms and money into Syria because it's in our economic and regional interest to remove Bashar al-Assad. But that's not in the that's up to the Syrian people to decide. And while there was initially a popular rebellion, a popular uprising in Syria, this was co-opted by the West and manipulated into something different. So all these arms and money started to float around the region, and several extremist groups began to obtain arms and funding this way. And one of them was Islamic State of Iraq, which by I think 2012, the middle of 2012, had then morphed and renamed itself Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. And that's today what we call ISIS or ISIL. Now, supposedly it goes by Islamic State. There's a different word for their different name for the group in Arabic. But this has really morphed and evolved, and the group has expanded and grown very strong because no one can keep tabs on where the money and arms that the Western countries are sending into Syria. No one can keep tabs on where they're going, and we are directly or indirectly arming this group. But it's not clear as the situation is unfolding and it's shifting day to day. It's still not clear to me exactly where they are in control, and certainly They are very strict. They are extremist, and they are oppressive to the people in the neighborhoods that they're controlling. But the full extent of where they're operating I don't think that's been officially identified. They are claiming they claimed the caliphate for this area of northwestern Iraq and northeastern Syria, but they don't have popular support of all the people in this area, and it's not clear to me exactly to what extent they are in control.
Mm-hmm. So they're sort of like an amorphous group. It's, they don't have defined boundaries which they exist in. So how is sending airstrikes going to be effective, and how is that going to sort of meet the goal that Obama would like to accomplish?
Well, I think you just hit the nail on the head right there. A very good political analyst, Vijay Prashad, noted that his term was that this is an amoeba-like group that is changing in its form, and wherever one set of airstrikes goes to hit them, it's easy if they really are spread out over this wide area, they can simply move out and adjust their presence and relocate their presence. And again, because there remains this ongoing influx of arms and funding, not only from the Western countries, but by way of regional powers like Saudi Arabia, like the other Gulf states, that they can continue to maintain their strength. So this is not a problem, and I don't, this is not something to be solved militarily. The defeat of an extremist group like this is not going to come through military action. It has to come through some sort of political solution, and the proposals that I've heard, which make a lot of sense, are those that involve regional conversations, because those groups, those Gulf states and the Western states, need to stop pouring arms and monies that are going to support the extremist groups. So it should be a regional dialogue. But again, I'm questioning Obama's words that this is all about the extremist group in the same area that we've identified or that we've been told that ISIS has established a so-called caliphate. This is also a region, northwestern Iraq and the north and east areas of Syria, that have a lot of oil. And I think that may be one of the major factors that is really guiding airstrikes, is that we are seeking control of the oil in this area. When I was speaking back in June, I mentioned that there was a new popular uprising against the Iraqi government in Baghdad. And this involved multiple groups, multiple Iraqi tribal leaders, and one of the groups, which was a minority group at the time, was this group ISIS. But I think what's happened at this point is that ISIS has been built up so much that the uprising that once focused its energy on toppling the government in Baghdad has now forced to battle these fighters who are very well armed and funded. So it's really a huge mess that is still unfolding. But I think that the bottom line is more likely an issue of controlling the oil of the region rather than protecting the region or America or the world from an extremist group that we are being told is now the most terrifying force on the planet, but that wasn't even in existence in its current form a year and a half ago. So I have trouble buying that story, as I do most stories coming from my government.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And have you spoken, you have family members in Iraq, have you spoken with family members about ISIS?
I have not, and recently the internet has been cut, so I'm cut off from them for the time being. Occasionally we'll send a text message. So I think they're okay, but we haven't been able to talk about this. But actually another reason for that is we usually don't, as a general rule, ever since the days of Saddam Hussein's regime, politics are not discussed over the phone. And of course that was my father's conversation with my relatives. And now today, even with the, supposedly we brought democracy to Iraq. That's not the case. But the level of fear of who's listening continues to be there. So we rarely discuss politics on the phone, but the concern before the internet was cut, the concern was what additional airstrikes were going to do, not only the death and destruction it would directly bring, but the political fallout. If we look at basically the U.S. invasion in 2003 through today in Iraq, if we look at what we did to Libya that you mentioned, we look at how we've supported the destabilization of Syria, military action thus far has increased destabilization and fostered the emergence of these extremist groups. We don't have any evidence that more military strikes will defeat them. It's only going to bring more destabilization, and it's only going to kill more innocent people. And those pictures are coming out through the internet. I post them on Facebook and on Twitter as I can. This is the bottom line for me, is that the people on the ground, whether it's the Syrian people or the Iraqi people or the people of Yemen whom we are continuing to drone, or the people of Pakistan whom we are continuing to drone, and these are the people, they are paying the highest price, and they are continuing to pay that price while weapons manufacturers are laughing all the way to the bank.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's been evidence or documents that indicate that the neocon ideologies always has the position that it takes an event, a horrendous event, an event that shocks the conscience, like 9/11 or like the beheading of journalists, to get Americans motivated to be involved, to embrace the idea of intervening militarily in an action when something has been done, some horrendous event has taken place. And I think of 9/11, as I said, and also because I spoke with people who are against military intervention as a general proposition, but when they feel that journalists are being attacked and beheaded, that's so barbaric to them. And journalists represent the freedom of the press, the First Amendment. That is such a heinous and barbaric act that they can justify military action, military intervention. So maybe this is is there something purposeful going on here, intentional?
And this is what we've seen before. This is why, I don't dispute the extremism of this organization and other organizations like it. But I remember very clearly in 1990 when we were told that Iraqi soldiers were going into Kuwaiti hospitals and pulling babies out of incubators, taking the incubators, for what reason, I don't know, and leaving the babies on the cold floor to die. Right. And this was a manufactured lie by the propaganda firm, which they call them a public relations firm, but it's a propaganda firm called Hill and Knowlton. This is manufacturing anger, and as you described, you need something for people to rally behind. And the neoconservative plan called for a Pearl Harbor-like event to implement their plans for dominating the world, basically, but starting with this particular region because the oil resources there were so valuable. And many people refer to that as a reference to something like September 11th happening, which has, and I don't think it was a coincidence that Obama waited until the night of September 10th to also use that memory of what happened on September 11th, 2001 to garner more support for airstrikes. He has also said on more than one occasion that we're not sending ground troops in, but there are special forces on the ground in the north that we have sent in. And I think this is what is termed mission creep, is that we have this now. The door is open to bomb not only Iraq but Syria as well. And given that license, I don't know what this administration is going to do with it. But again, it's an effort to expand the control of oil, and the government still has on its agenda to remove the current president of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, from power. And I believe that this is part of the agenda now as well. And this is really the same disaster that we see in Iraq, the same disaster that exists today in Libya. This is what we will see more completely in Syria if the established government is removed. Now, that's not to defend the actions of the regime in Syria. But what I'm saying is that is up for the Syrian people to decide, not to be manipulated by outside forces to make a decision for them and then install a new government that serves Western interests. This is up to the Syrian people and no one else, and the future of Iraq is up to the Iraqi people and nobody else.
Exactly. I know recently, I think sometime earlier this week, a conference was held about the airstrikes that were going to take place, and they didn't, heads of states were involved in Paris, France, and yet members of the Assad regime and Iran weren't even invited. They were not even invited to attend this conference regarding airstrikes in their region. When we come back from the break, we're going to talk about the neocon ideology and how their ideology has led to persistent and endless war. We'll be back. I'm with Dahlia Wasfi, my guest. We'll be right back. Welcome back, KCA listeners, to the Kathleen Wells Show. My guest today is Dahlia Wasfi, who is an internationally known speaker and activist. She is the daughter of a Jewish mother and a Muslim father, and she lived in Iraq until she was 5 years old. In fact, she went back twice since shock and awe to visit relatives. And she speaks all around the world about what's going on. In fact, her desire is that America withdraw from Iraq. And she believes that there's a need to end the occupation. We talked about this in July, when she was here in July a few months ago. But now here, what is that noise I'm hearing, Mia? Do you hear something? Oh, okay. Dahlia, I think we hear some noise like an airplane or something. Oh. Hi, Dahlia. Anyway, Dahlia spoke about I'm thinking we're having some technical problems. I'm sorry, KCA listeners, that we're having difficulty, but nonetheless, I hope you're enjoying the show.
I can't hear the show.
Oh, you can't hear the show, but we can hear you. What I wanted to talk to you about, Dahlia, is the neocon ideology, which has led to this era of endless war and the necessity to sort of fracture and break up the Middle East. Can you talk on that?
Sure, we can definitely touch on that. And I think, it was the neoconservative ideology. Now I don't know, with Obama in office, we call it the neoliberal ideology, but the goal is ultimately the same. And that's hegemony over this part of the world and the rest of the world as well. At the same time that we're going through all these machinations in the Arab world, or I should say, actually, Western Asia. This is the area that's traditionally called the Middle East. We are doing the same thing in Latin America. We helped bring a coup to fruition in Honduras in 2009. That was all under Barack Obama, and now we are seeking to put a neoliberal government into power. And again, the same thing there in subjecting and oppressing the people. This is the sort of looking again for global control. And, to bring in, sort of, you mentioned before the horror of beheading journalists, that was just a line that can't be crossed, and that means we should do airstrikes. We just witnessed a 50-day military assault on 1.7 million people in Gaza who had nowhere to run to. And this is a civilian population. This was a genocide that was committed by the Israeli government, only the most recent massacre in a long history of massacres since 1948. And that, did they not cross a line when they killed 4 boys playing soccer on the beach? Did they not cross a line when 25 members of the same family were killed, when their house was destroyed as they were breaking the Ramadan fast? Did they not cross a line when they killed over 2,000 people because they were Palestinian? This is an ongoing genocide that we are complicit in. And the problem is the double standards in our policy, because depending on what serves our economic interest and our economic agenda, we either focus on atrocity, or we turn our heads away, or worse, we arm the people who are committing the atrocities. So this is global policy that we're seeing it dramatically, and I'm most focused on this part of the world because of my background, but this is really happening on a larger scale. The news of Ukraine has fallen off the radar. It's fallen off of my radar. I don't hear many people talking about it, but this is where we sponsored a coup to bring in a right-wing government that was more favorable to Western economic interests. So we are seeing this whole ideology being put in place in policies around the world. And if we truly want national security here at home, we had better stop screwing up people's lives around the globe.
Yeah, and didn't we, America, bomb a hotel that had journalists housed, where journalists were housed? Didn't we do that? And haven't we done?
We did that. Yes, we did that in 2003, and it was a record for during the course of the American military occupation. I think it was over 170 journalists were murdered. This is Tariq Ayoub, who was with Al Jazeera. He was killed by an American airstrike in the first weeks of shock and awe. So this issue of targeting journalists or targeting children, our policies do that. So we have to be objective, and we have to open our eyes. As disgusting and offensive as it is to see, we have to recognize that it's our own hand that's doing these things. And we have got to change our policies, not only so that neither directly nor indirectly are we fostering these kind of crimes around the world. Absolutely, bring attention to what is being committed by these extremist groups. But let us look at the crimes against humanity that have been committed by one of the world's most dangerous groups, most dangerous gangs for the last century. That would be the United States military and the Israeli military. These are my greatest concerns today. These are the ones who have the blood of literally millions on their hands. This is where my concern is, and that's why our policy has to change.
Right, and you can't quantify these things. Like, what is horrific and barbaric can't be quantified. It's all horrible, and one shouldn't trump another. That
exactly.
One should not trump another. Just because journalists were beheaded, yeah, that's barbaric and horrific. But we've done barbaric and horrific things too. In fact, I just saw.
We pretty much invented it.
Yeah,
we didn't invent it. There were other empires before us. I should correct myself on that. But what we've done in bombing countries and removing democratically elected governments, and the environmental contamination alone, and the cancers, and the list goes on and on, that we are responsible, that either our tax dollars or our military is responsible for, that have only created these very dire situations that we're now saying that we have to correct.
Exactly. In fact, I just saw a documentary on the after effects of Agent Orange in Vietnam. They are still suffering from that in Vietnam. You can see. So we're going to take a break. My guest is Dahlia Wasfi, Middle East expert. We're talking about Iraq. We're talking about horrific events. We can't quantify horrific events. They're all horrible. One doesn't trump another. We'll be back with Dahlia. Hi, this is the Kathleen Wells Show. My guest is Dahlia Wasfi. She's an Iraqi American and a Middle East expert. You know what I wanted to ask you, Dahlia? Talk to me about the involvement, the responsibility and accountability of the Gulf states. What are they doing exactly? Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Turkey. What is their responsibility? What have they been doing directly and indirectly?
Well, they are also responsible for putting arms and funding in to support these extremist groups. But we, it's hard to tell what's originally theirs, and what I mean is that the Saudis have, I think every year we sign a new arms deal with them. So they buy their weapons from the U.S. and maybe some of them gets sold or passed on to these extremist groups. Turkey is also supposed to, from what I'm reading, Turkey is very much involved in the transferring of arms and funding. That's the transfer area from places like Libya to Turkey, and then into Syria. So I can't say exactly what, who's moved what and who's funded what, but all this money, it's been documented, just generally, that this is probably a lot of the heavy weaponry and the heavy, like the armored personnel carriers that ISIS now has access to, that these have come perhaps from the Gulf countries Special Protection Force, which was in place since the first Gulf War. This is all this changing hands of funds and arms. This is being facilitated by those Gulf countries. And I've also read that within Jordan, there are both the U.S. and the Israeli governments are involved in training some of these opposition groups who may then join, if we train them for what's been known as the Free Syrian Army, those individuals can join other groups. And one report I read said that a number of ISIS members have come from the Free Syrian Army. So it's a big mess. It's a big there's this influx of arms and money, and to really cut off the influence of extremist groups, that flow needs to be cut off. And that does not happen with airstrikes. That happens with regional conversations, regional diplomacy, which is something that, diplomacy is, I'm not sure it's still in the American lexicon. But this is what really legitimately has to come down to if we're going to make progress for a stable region. But, I shouldn't say we, because I don't live there. I'm not a part of that region. But for sure, we don't want a stable region, because destabilization there, carving up these countries into smaller states with the idea that the smaller states are weaker states, this helps U.S. Control of the region. This helps Israeli national security. And that consistently is what has been our agenda for that part of the world.
And so there's no denying that America in the last era, in the last decade, has been involved in perpetual endless war. This can't go on, and the American people need to stand up. We have one more minute left, Dahlia. How would you like to end? What would you like KCAA listeners to know?
Well, I just want to clarify that I'm not a practicing physician. There's no way I could keep up with the information by doing a full-time job like that too. But I just want people to know, for more information of what I'm talking about, I have lots of postings on Facebook. You can find me there, Dr. Dahlia Wasfi, or you can find me on Twitter at Liberate This. But the bottom line is airstrikes kill civilians, and we've had enough of that, and so have they.
We've had enough of that, and so have they. Thank you, Dahlia. I'll have you on again. It was delightful to have you on today. Thank you for being a guest.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, see you soon. That was Dahlia Wasfi as my guest. This is the Kathleen Wells Show, and I'll see you next week. We're going to have a great guest. I think we're going to talk about, what are we going to talk about? I'll tell you later. Bye. Bye.